It's November 4th, 1992. This is with interview with Marc Silber in Berkeley, California. We were talking about
breaking out of jail.
The best way to go about getting down your story and your involvement in the folk scene, and we realized that we've seen a lot of references to you as we've read old sing-outs.
Oh, no.
We've seen pictures of you in Bob Shelton's big glossy book and some other books, I think. But
yeah, that was sort of the. Dave Garr was a guy he's the photographer of that book. And in that I was big and athletic, and he liked to go to bad parts of Manhattan and take photos. He used to ask me to always go with him. And I, even though I wasn't famous as a musician, he decided that I was part of the scene. He was the only one that could really see that I was actually part of it.
Well, you've done a good entree to what we were talking about. You weren't famous in one sense, except you're in all these books. So we wanted to get a sense of how you were part of the scene. Why don't we start with how you came to the scene? What was your first...
how I got involved in the music?
Yeah, why don't we start back there for a little context, maybe go over it somewhat briefly, but it'll give us some context for moving on into your involvement in the village.
Well, it was pretty easy. Up until the time I was almost 20, I spent most of my life doing physical things like athletics, and I'd done a lot of canoeing in the woods and hadn't really spent time with music other than I liked it. And then one day when I was studying for my finals all day at the University of Michigan, and just thought I'd better go outside the library for a few minutes. It was a spring day. I went out, and there was the Ann Arbor Folk Club having a little thing outside on the lawn. So I went, oh, this sounds nice. I wonder, I've never heard anything like this. And that was pretty much it. A few weeks later, I wasn't an athlete anymore. And the club, or the society, even though they were supposed to be communist for some reason, I was so naive that I couldn't understand how people that were doing American folk music were supposed to be anti-American. So I fearlessly joined up, and they offered free lessons and a few discounts for concerts and stuff like that. And it pretty much impressed me that I actually could learn to play. If Ann Arbor Folklore Society was pretty democratic. You paid $2 for an entire year, and then got free lessons, and once a week they'd meet, and they'd have discounts to all the events. So.
Did you play anything at that point?
No.
Did you play the guitar?
No, I didn't play.
You never picked up a guitar?
I played about 3 songs on the ukulele. I learned to play the ukulele really in the middle of the woods in Ontario, Canada, from a guy that was a little older than me who was in a little campfire singing group. The ironic thing is his name was Bernie Krause, and he lived a few miles from where I grew up in Detroit. I didn't really know him. And later, much to my amazement, there he was in the Weavers. Like about 10 years later, I suddenly went, hey, wait a minute. And then later he's gone on to be a pioneer in the synthesizer world. And he plays avant-garde music, and he lives in San Francisco. But he taught me 3 songs on uke, and I played them for like 1,000,000 times. Never thought of making anything up or not making anything up. I actually made up a lot of stuff, but I didn't realize it. I mean, I taught myself how to fingerpick on uke without realizing that. I mean, I was just bored. So I said, wonder if you do this and do that. So that was when I was about 13. So from 13 to 20, I played these 3 songs on those long, hot summer days. I mean, when I was just bored to the max, I'd get my little plastic uke and play. But in retrospect, I can see that I actually was learning something like a kid that bangs on a piano, a boogie-woogie line, and then 20 years later go, oh, wow. So I actually had learned. And when I actually started learning to play officially was in Ann Arbor. Now, my mother had been taking a few classes at the Y of folk songs, and she had a guitar, so I used that. Pretty soon, I was influenced mostly by 2 people, Al Young, who's now a writer of books, and he teaches at Stanford. Well, he teaches all over the place, but teaches literature, and he hasn't been a musician the whole time. Recently, I heard gossip that he's singing in a trio somewhere. But he had a tremendous influence on me, and another young guy named Perry Letterman, who was and is one of the outstanding guitarists, especially unrecorded guitarists. So he was the first one I really heard that was advanced, and I was so gung-ho to learn it that we just played hours and hours a day. Eventually, I followed Al out to Berkeley. He had decided that he had to go to Mexico. He had learned Spanish. He had to go to Mexico. Of course, being from Detroit, he thought Mexico was somewhere near California. So.
Was this the late 50s? When were you in Michigan?
Well, I came to Berkeley in 1960.
Okay, so you were in Michigan for a few years.
A few days after Al got here and wrote me a letter about how nice it was. How it was just like Ann Arbor, except warm. So off I went. I've been here off and on since 1960. I spent about 5 years in New York and about 10 years traveling. I mean, I had never really counted them, but I've traveled quite a bit.
How long did you stay in Berkeley before you went back to New York?
Well, I went back and forth to Ann Arbor mostly. In 1963, I went to New York. My girlfriend, who was finished school in Ann Arbor, was taking a job in Europe as a teacher, so I thought I'll go say goodbye to her. And while I was over there saying goodbye is when I wound up broke with a lot of instruments in the trunk of my car and thought, I guess I have to sell one. And that's where I first found out that people in New York didn't know anything. I first found out because I thought I knew nothing. I mean, I really was just 1.5 years into it. But I'd been to Berkeley and I'd been hanging out in John and Deirdre Lundberg's store. It's all easy to see now, but it was just the store I passed by. And I said, whoa, look at this. And you just don't know. A few times in my life I've been lucky like that. You just don't know that you're finding the actual center of a certain universe. I still think of John. Deirdre's died now, years ago, but John I still think of as the person who knows the most about the field I'm in spite of the fact that he's not even in it anymore. There's very few people you could ask a question of such a specific nature.
John
Lundberg.
Okay, her husband. You didn't mention that name before.
John and Deirdre. Yeah. Okay. So we pretty much hung around his shop. We played guitar every day till they made us quit. And they had the free coffee, so as we got broker and broker, we hung out there more and more.
They sold guitars and all.
They had a shop. They had the first shop of that type. He was the first one that had figured out. In other words, when I came to New York and thought I didn't know anything, I might have known infinitely more than anybody else in New York about what actually happened. Because no one had put it together. No one knew how big a Martin was or what age it was. They only knew, I think this is from, I don't know, it's from. And these type of non-logical approaches still persist, but there's been so many books printed now that it's pretty, it's cleared up a lot. So as soon as I figured that out and went to sell an instrument, and nobody would give me anything for these beautiful old instruments I have, I was just incensed. So in spite of having had bad business fortunes dealing with Israel Young at the Folklore Center, in short, where's my money, Izzy? We decided to go partners and open a store.
Wait a second, did you leave him equipment on consignment or something? Some instruments?
Well, I had left a guitar there years before. And being that I was in Ann Arbor, I had a hard time getting the money. So when I finally went to New York and confronted Izzy about it, he nonchalantly said, I gave it to a friend of yours that came in here and said I was supposed to give him the money. And I was the one that was from the sticks, so I was quite shocked about the sophisticated New Yorker telling me that he'd given it to this black guy who said he was my friend, who in reality was a friend of mine, but he was a crook. He was a friend of mine through athletics, but when his athletic career ended, he went on to, he actually made the cover of Life magazine once as the biggest campus crook in America. and for that, I still, in fact, to this day, I've never been paid for that beautiful guitar. But in spite of that, after Izzy and I talked for a little while that day, And he said, well, I wish I knew someone who knew a lot about instruments. I'd just open another store and just deal in instruments. And then he jumped up and said, wait a minute, do you want to do it? I saw a store for rent. It's like, and I went, yeah, sure, why not? You know. So we opened a store by the next day.
Let's backtrack a little bit,
Okay.
if you can. When you were in Ann Arbor and Berkeley, were you going into New York at all?
No.
No, not at all.
Well, I mean, if there was occasion for it. I mean, I went to the Newport Folk Festival once.
Okay.
So, of course, we went.
Would have
I
been
think it was
59 or
59, I
60,
think.
yeah, before they shut down for a few years. Yeah.
Well, this was in Newport. This was, when it was actually at the town of Newport.
Right. I mean, they shut down in
And it's-
61, 62. They didn't hold
Did
the
they?
festival. Yeah.
Yeah, and in 63 they restarted it.
Oh, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
It was the year Charles Mingus had his own jazz festival at a hotel in Newport, and it was where I first heard of him. And I thought, well, why isn't he in it? Little did I know that it was a complicated subject. But it still is the same question persisting. Why wasn't he in it?
Right.
So we were enthusiastic. I went. Perry Letterman was from New York, and a few of the other Ann Arbor folkies. So somehow we decided to meet there and go to the Newport Folk Festival. And as enthusiastic, would go early. No sleeping bags, no nothing. Just go early, So we hitched up there, right out of Manhattan. I don't know what we were doing. I don't know how we did it, really. And we got there the day before it was supposed to happen, and we went to the ocean, figured it was going to be on the beach, and walked up and down this freezing beach all night. And a few of us found an old boat and got under it. It was just one of those horrible nights. But I do remember one bonfire with people singing. And the guy singing, I actually, wow, that guy can actually sing. I mean, he actually sings loud and he's on tune. Of course, I'm talking about white city people. There wasn't too many people who could sing at that point. And his name was Dino Valente. He later got credit for writing a lot of songs. And it was kind of an odd character, so I never really did through the years know what he wrote, what he stole, what he borrowed. But in the folk tradition, it didn't really matter. It didn't matter until we later found out that you could copyright these things. I mean, nobody was really... It was a naive thing, and later on, that was a big other subject of the money making and copywriting, etc. So here we were in Newport, which I suppose was summer of '59.
It would have been either 59 or 60, from what you're telling me. It would have been either 59 or 60.
Well, it could have been my recollection, which...
Do you know if it was the one where Joan Baez was brought out by Bob Gibson and was her big introduction? That was 59.
No, then it was probably 60.
Okay.
Yeah, we already had heard of Joan Baez by that time. So I remember my biggest accomplishment of the summer was that I was standing in Newport with my foot in the Atlantic. And a few months later, I was standing in Carmel with my foot. And then I thought, well, now I've done what Woody Guthrie did, so I thought I'd really done something, because it was a big adventure to me. After that, I went back and forth from Berkeley to Ann Arbor with occasional ventures into the folk suburbs, which would have included L.A., San Francisco, of course, Chicago, Oberlin University, University of Chicago Folk Society. We'd sort of go visit these other folk societies. And by 1961, I was playing a little, although I didn't know too much stuff, but I was playing. They had the Grand Ann Arbor Folk Festival, and believe it or not, people still come in my store today and they remember it. Like if they were at school there, they remember it because for some reason everybody was moving around and passing through Ann Arbor at one time, and it was just when that was happening. So in spite of the festival poster having a lot of names which seem illustrious to me now, there was a lot of other people who weren't on it that, and the only one on it is my friend Danny Kalb, who wasn't in it. When I saw the poster a few months ago, I called him up. I said, you weren't in that, were you? He says, no, I didn't go. So I said, oh, because everybody else was in it. Then Butterfield and Bob Dylan and Elvin Bishop and Richmond Talbot. I don't know why. Everybody was just Jim Kweskin. It was Dylan's first job away from home, so to speak, after he went to New York. It was the first time he ever... In fact, I think it's the first poster he probably ever was on, as far as it might predate Izzy's little song.
Right. Oh, okay.
That he has, where he thinks he has the first thing printed by Dylan.
Do you have that poster?
I have a facsimile of it, yeah. Well, that leads us... You want to try it?
I'd like to see if we're picking this up. We got a home
not,
back there. With headphones, we'll be able to transcribe.
question I want to ask at this point.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay.
You're traveling now in the folk music world. By this time on the popular charts, there's people like the Kingston Trio and all these other
Not quite yet, I don't
groups.
think.
58 was the...
Were they?
What's the song? What the hell's the big... Tom Dooley.
Tom Dooley.
58
Oh,
was
yeah.
Tom Dooley. And
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
wondering if that was
Well, that
considered
was-
a great event. Was it
Oh, yeah.
scoffed at? Was it...
Oh, it didn't have any effect at all, but what happened was they were so lousy and they were so successful that it made you think you could do that. And, they were just like some college guys that gave it the old yo-ho, and it went over. And, of course, we didn't know one thing about ethnic music. I mean,
frat house folk is what I've called it. Yeah.
in a way it was.
Yeah.
Well, it's that interesting thing that took me 20 to 30 years to figure out what, quote, folk music, unquote, was. And it's the stuff really from the 60s. But because the people I hung out with went into that or started in it, and then pursued the music instead of the performers, and wound up in the ethnic side of it, fascinated with all the multiple ethnic offerings, mostly on Folkways record and a few other labels and people traveling that came back. All unconscious or non-conscious. We weren't even thinking about that Lightning Hopkins came and played and he was real. We just went, oh, a blues guy's coming. We didn't really realize that he was any different from someone that was like Josh White Jr., who played blues. And so what you had was the music establishment influencing something that used to be ethnic music. And of course, it represents, in retrospect, the breakdown of what you call culture. There isn't any more culture. We see it now. There's no real culture. There's nothing that gets planted from one generation to the next. It's all dumped on them from on top. And it's supposed to filter down, and then they act like Valley Girls or hip-hop. Well, hip-hop seems a little more realistic in that it's coming from people that live in one area in certain towns, and so it's not a best example. But anyway, the Kingston Trio, and then, of course, there was many groups like that. There was the Limelighters, the Wayfarers, the Snorers, the So-and-So Quartet. And all of it was, I'd buy the records and compare them and go, I like this guy. And it was really just like you would do anything else, but little by little, my friend Al Young was the sole importer of Folkways records into the Detroit and Ann Arbor area. So we used to order from him, and then a few times a year he'd go to New York and buy them. He'd come back and you'd get your records. Well, little by little, under his influence, really, we would listen to Leadbelly's Last Sessions a million times and the Harry Smith Anthology of Folk Music, really to get songs. Or here's that one that the New Lost City Ramblers play. Oh, this is where they got it. So that was really the start. And it was Folkways single-handedly, more or less, that had that educational approach and offered music as it was, for good or bad. I mean, I have a lot of respect for any record company that records what they like and just presents it. Or any musicologist that just decides this is an example of something and lets the people do their thing, as opposed to managing them and suggesting that their tradition doesn't include certain things, which is one of my pet peeves. So we have been positively influenced by these groups, and at the same time they're meaningless. It's just a historical event. I mean, I don't know what else would have took its place. I had a little group when I first played of some guy that was in fraternity and another guy I knew from sports, and we'd practice and sing a few tunes, and then they asked us to play in an amateur show, so we bought similar shirts. And that's about how far it went.
Yeah.
We go, we better all go buy the same shirt, and then we'll be a group. And we used to practice, but it was for fun. And as soon as we were a group, one guy thought we weren't good enough. So that was like, we'd sing any song we knew. Anything we could sing, we would sing it. We had no... So that would have been a version of modern ethnic music.
Did you self-consciously look for songs that you could call folk music, as opposed to singing pop songs?
No, it was a pretty desperate attempt to get any material that you could... First of all, I didn't sing too much in those days, but in the group I would sing part of the harmony. And I had absolutely no consciousness that we were on stage or we weren't on stage. We were singing in somebody's house. It didn't make any difference. We just were amateur. It was just like you were at a campfire and sang a song. As far as what happened later, it's a long change between 1960 and 1963 or 64, where groups had managers. People you didn't know would show up dressed in suits and tell you that you owed them money.
Like what?
Well, like, my group wrote that and you sang it the other night. You had something I'm still not in favor of, which is called copywriting. So
what did you decide before going to New York that you'd open up a music shop there?
No, we just decided right on the spot.
Okay.
I said nobody knows anything. Izzy wants someone who knows something to do partners with him. I really got nothing to do except I got a carload of instruments. I had $4. And he's the only one of the two of us that knew what it meant to see a place for see someone put a sign in a window physically, like a couple hours before, right around the block. I went like, hey, get another place. But of course he knew what New York was like. And sure enough, it was the ad for that building, that office, was getting released in the Village Voice the next morning. So we ran over, we called the guy, we made the deal.
How much was that?
It was $100 a month, 1963.
And that was on,
Now, this was Fretted Instruments on 6th Avenue?
That was on 6th Avenue. That was
Okay.
321 6th Avenue. And the reason it was so cheap, there was a reason. At that time, 6th Avenue was two ways. Or it's called the Avenue of the Americas when
Right.
you look at the street sign, but everyone calls it 6th. The traffic that came from uptown to downtown, of course, would pass right in front of my shop, because I was on the west side of the street. The bus system, however, ended there, at what you call Father Demo Square, Carmine Street, or Bleecker Street. There's a little...
Yeah.
And the buses would line up and leave their diesels running, and they'd line up all the way down the block, one after the other, before they went to their next stage. And so we were, it was just like, whoa. It was just black smoke coming up the whole time. But fortunately, a month later, they made it one way. The other way, uptown.
Uptown.
And so we just wound up having a real good deal. A wonderful old-time New York landlord, slightly accepting of Bohemia, like a guy that had lived in the village since he came to America.
So,
And
did he move the folklore center?
no.
No, that was later.
No, I was over there for quite a while.
That was
And
65.
then the place next door came up for rent. I was on the first flight up, or second floor as we call it here. And I said, hey, we got to get it and cut a hole in the wall, and then we really have a place. So we did everything and got it and went, paid off ethnic groups that demanded money for such moves. And when it came to cutting the hole in the wall, the ethnic price tag was too high, so we never did cut it. The everybody showed up. Fire marshals, village superintendents, everybody, building superintendents. They all wanted a lot of money for cutting this hole and making it fireproof. So we never did it, so the whole time you had to go downstairs from Izzy's, run one door south, run back up into mine. So the whole time there were people like going up and down.
For the first couple of years, 63 to I think it was 65 when Izzy moved, what was your business arrangement with Izzy? Were you partners?
Yeah,
then?
we were partners. 50-50.
But he was on McDougal Street selling...
Well, he had nothing to do with my store, really, except he now didn't sell strings and supplies like that. And we sold instruments and did repairs, and it was all very in its infancy, But we didn't have enough money to get electricity, so I'd go at night and plug into the light bulb in the hallway and do my repairs.
Theoretically, he got 50% of your business, you got 50% of his?
No.
How did
not the
it...
No, I wasn't partners in the folklore center.
Oh, I see. He was a partner in your
He was a partner
new
in
venture.
Yeah, he was a
Got it.
partner in the instrument shop, which we call Fretted Instruments.
I understand.
And of course, the timing of it, and the fact that I had wandered around the country and looked for instruments, and the fact that no one else was really doing anything in New York, led to a great stratospheric rise of popularity till the place was just...
Yeah, tell us about when you opened and what started happening.
Talk about your opening, yeah, and how you started.
Well, we didn't really open. I mean, one day I said, we got to open. So you have to realize this is coincidental to November '63. Well, at the time, my girlfriend, who was on her way to teach art in Europe, really saved us because I said, we've got everything figured out. We got the wall hanging and we got all, placed the workbench. We can't figure out how to fix the floor. It was this rotten old wood floor and it was worn out by the front door. She said, well, just go around to the paint store and get some floor paint. And then one night, paint it and you stay over somewhere else and it's dry and you're done. So we went, oh, wow. Just paint it, one of those industrial colors, dark reddish brown. So the next day I went over, this would be November 22nd, 1963. I went over to the West Village, which is really an Italian community. And there were limousines everywhere next to the church and people crying, and I was quite impressed, wow, someone around here dies. It's really like a big thing, And everybody was just crying and crying, and I went to the paint store, and even these guys that were used to like a tough style of business were just beside themselves. And I bought the paint, and on the way back, I heard a radio coming out of a convertible as people had pulled over, and of course it was the Kennedy assassination. So that's pretty much the three things that were coincidental, not in order of importance, but the Beatles were just out. The Kennedy assassination, and that first feeling in the United States for me of like, well, what's going to happen? Like, we had no idea like how that could happen or what would happen or did Russian spies do it or who would do that. We had no idea. And of course, the most important, the opening of fretted instruments with the new paint on the floor. One thing that's interesting, I mean, it's a gossip thing, but when we painted the place, there was a group of students that came from a private school in Massachusetts, and they were riding around in this Cadillac hearse that had a big hole cut in the top. And they had a plastic bubble they could put on it if it rained. And that was I remember 3 of them. There was about 5 of them. And they offered to paint my place for the privilege of sleeping there overnight. So they'd paint it, and then they'd just crash on the floor, right in the fumes and everything. And one of them was Jeffrey Outlaw. He is now a record producer in Texas, I think. And one was Arlo Guthrie. And one was just a guy that was called Jack, who I remember, a blonde kid. And boy, they just painted that place up, and then thanks a lot for letting us sleep here.
So it's November. Did you, by that time, have a real consciousness of the village as a center of this new bohemian folk scene?
Well, it was the bohemian scene.
Yeah, that
had been going on for about...
I guess the folk music scene.
No, well, my whole information about the village came from Harry Letterman, who said things like, well, see, there's a village right in New York, and when you get there, just ask anybody where I am. So, of course, I did. My first day, I arrived with 2 guitars hitchhiking, and I said, excuse me, man, you know where Perry is? And this guy, I'll never forget the look on his face.
You were in Midtown or something?
I was in a village, and I thought it was going to be a village.
Right.
So I just...
Thatched roofs.
Yeah, right. I just asked all day, and by the end of the night, I said I better, I got 2 guitars and a little thing of clothes, so I went to a park, and I lay down, and I put my foot on the guitar and my head on the other guitar, and I was just about to fall asleep, and I said, I bet this isn't cool. I bet someone will try to steal one. So I went to a flop house and took a room right in the village there. It's now a very fancy apartment called the Atrium. Originally called Mills Hotel Number 1. And slept on paper sheets there, like every time you turn over you thought it was a fire. So then I left my guitars and stuff in there and decided to go out and ask for Perry. And the minute I stepped out, I heard this voice calling my name, and it was Al Young. Having a beer in the local corner bar where bohemians hung out. And they had somehow gotten a hold of this apartment uptown of like 7 bedrooms, which was a hilarious situation. 2 girls from Ann Arbor had rented it, and their parents wouldn't let them stay there till they had certain locks put in. So every few days a locksmith would come and put them in, and as soon as they leave, we'd break them. We'd undo them and unscrew them and take them out and put the old ones back in. We lasted about 3 months in there like that, living for free and sneaking into the subway and going to Chinatown and eating for 20 cents. It was kind of a great, hobo existence. That would have been 1960, I guess, when we were doing that. So pretty soon we knew a few people in Long Island because someone from Ann Arbor would be there. And later, a lot of these people showed up on the folk scene in various forms, Like the neighbor in Long Island was a guy called, his name was David, and he later showed up as Bruno Wolf in Jim Kweskin's band. And then later wound up as a barefoot guy pushing macrobiotic push carts through the East Village, and eventually opened up a huge restaurant over there, and I think he made millions in health food. I forgot his name, but he was called Bruno Wolf, and he's in Kweskin's band. He was the harmonica player before they got the later edition, whose name was Skip. But a lot of the people, there wasn't that many people on the scene in retrospect. Of course, you were meeting more and more, so it seemed like, wow, there's all these bohemian and beatniks.
Were you guys political in any real sense of the word, other than having a...
Well, some people were. Uh-huh. Some people had visions of sharing, and for that they called the Ann Arbor Folk Society communist. And in a naive way, it's where I first heard the differences of communal and socialist and communist and Leninist, and it was really people from New York that knew that stuff and could argue about it. And at the same time, I always had a certain opinion I still have, which is, well, if we win it, if we are successful in all these changes, does that mean you're going to be in charge? And that always really kept me from wanting to be involved specifically in one of those isms, because I don't care to be led by any of these people, really, myself. I'm not a thieving, crooked. I don't need to be regulated by control things. So I've always asked, you'd hear people giving brilliant left-wing speeches and think they're completely crazy. This individual is like nuts. So it means if we follow their thing, are they in charge? It's a simple question, but I still ask it. So we went, that was the great Ann Arbor exodus. First Al Young came to Berkeley. Within a week I was here. By the end of the year there was about 35 people here, straight from Ann Arbor, just moved into Berkeley. And one of our friends who was in literary things and stage plays and stuff, Ann McIntosh, she had gone to school at a college called Vassar for 1 year, and she had a roommate who we never knew, but Charles Mingus was in love with her roommate. So we also were hanging out with Charles Mingus and exchanging musical ideas. Meanwhile, I couldn't really even play. When I think of it now, I say, hey, have you ever heard Odetta? This poor guy. Just because he liked this girl he had to put up with. Anyway, it had a great influence on me because over the years, I started to understand the greatness of this particular kind of achievement and production that few people were capable of being truly artistic. And I think Mingus really turned out to be one of the greatest. And whereas I don't play music like him, he influenced me quite a bit as far as just sticking to what your thing is. That's it. You can't do anything else.
What was your first sense? Can you describe your first sense that your store on 6th Avenue was a scene, a place, was going to be a big deal?
Well, the first thing that happened, I knew a few of these people. Artie Traum I knew from Berkeley. We traveled cross-country back to the East Coast. And so when I went to New York, of course, I found Artie and his brother Happy. And I've been friends with them ever since. We decided we'd have lessons at the shop. The Saturday morning, while I wasn't going to teach, but while doing repairs, these guys could teach in the shop. And, even if we made $4 or $5, $10, it was like the rent was so low. Go, oh, good, And then it came to be Dylan used to like to come by on Saturday mornings because Artie would be there and I'd be there, and then Dylan always very keen on song swapping. I don't mean it in a negative way. He always wants to hear any weird song, anything. You know, any version, any odd song. Big ears. You know, he's not. Of course, maybe he's looking for material, but that's Izzy's business. But we're all looking for material, I think. So Dylan would come. Of course, when I first opened the shop officially, the very first two people was Bob Dylan and Joan Baez came in and bought a few finger picks, and I went. Of course, they were both known, but they weren't really famous. So we just said, oh, the big guys are coming in already. This is going to be good. I already made 25 cents, you know. After that, Dylan liked to come by. He's getting, of course, more and more famous. And I think we met 3 or 4 Saturdays, and we'd swap songs and just sit around and play. And someone would show up for a lesson, and Artie'd give him a lesson. Pretty soon, I came one morning about 8, and there was a few kids hanging around outside my shop on the street. And they said, "Is it true Bob Dylan comes here on Saturday morning?" And I went, "Yeah." I said, "He comes and we sit around." So that was the first tiny little thing, and that lasted 1 week, because when I came the next Saturday, there were like 300 of them out there. I don't know, there was hundreds. I don't know what happened. There was a scene out there. And of course, whereas it was evidence of things to come, we never imagined that his record could ever really sell any amount. You know, it was going to be a folkies. He might sell 5,000. This thing where the times had changed, and it just hadn't been realized, you know. Of course, we had to immediately quit doing that. That was over, because you couldn't even have him come visit you anymore. And I never have seen him too much since then. I've seen him occasionally in the 60s and 70s, but I haven't really seen Bob Dylan since those days too much. Although Happy tells me he still likes to get together and swap tunes. So that was the first inkling of something really different was going to happen. And of course, we all had grown up in the 50s atomic bomb threat. And basically, I think the thoughts I had when I was real young was pretty much the truth of the whole situation. If they're going to blow it up, I'm going to have fun first. It's like you dropped out without even knowing what it was. I said, when it comes down to it, I'm going to have fun before they blow it up. So a certain selfish inclination was really the formula for the whole thing, I feel. It was that horrible, impending doom thing. And then you find a little group of people that wasn't living like that and being more creative. And I mean, I suppose I always knew I was going to be in the creative fields, but I had no sense of it at all. I'd never been. I still don't really. I'm still in it, and I don't have any. When I go on stage and play for thousands, I go, they're going to hear the same stuff that I did all the other times. So I don't have a sense of this showbiz and performing. A lot of the music I've enjoyed in my life has been from other sources. I like a good pop tune, but it's a long wait sometimes till you hear it.
Did you get out a lot and see performances in the early 60s
Yeah.
in New York? Did you go to the Gerties and the Gaslight? And,
Well, you pretty much had to keep going. Any place that let you in for free, you pretty much had to keep going there to maintain your status. Now, certain ones like Gertie's Folk City, in spite of Izzy being so involved in it, I couldn't get in for free. I mean, I just couldn't get in there. It was like they had millions of people getting in for free, but other ones I got in, Gaslight, and then if you didn't go for a few months, they'd go, "Who are you? It's $3." So at the same time, I was part of a different generation than the New York folkies. I'd always heard pop music. I'd heard Howling Wolf and Muddy Waters. I grew up in Detroit, and I always liked music, so I'd buy a few weird records. I'd heard these people. It just never occurred to me that there would be people who never heard standards or rock and roll, which would be the New York folkies. I just never conceived of the possibility that they just, like the Weavers was pop music to them. That's what they went and heard. Or they were folk dancers like Izzy. It was quite a different thing. I had a much different outlook of it.
Who do you mean by these New York folkies? Who was the New York folk mafia in 1963?
Well, they weren't really I wouldn't call them a mafia because that organizational thing where there was reasons to organize was in a more naive state. Mm-hmm. Well, you had the older people, Ed McCurdy, Jerry Silverman. I can't think of his name. Oscar Brandt.
Oscar
That's
Brandt,
kind.
Cynthia
Theodore
Gooding.
Bickel.
Uh-huh.
And of course, they were performers in a way. Cisco Houston. I mean, some of the people were more real folkies than the others. We just didn't have any way to judge that, or we didn't really care about it. Just cared if they liked them or not. You had Odetta. You had all kind of variations of this. And what they are is interpreters.
Sure.
They're interpreters. The only thing they never did was the real raw version of something that came from a people that they were part of. It was a performing interpretation. And of course, some of them wrote songs, so in that sense, they did create those things. You know, I think Ed McCurdy wrote a great piece song about
Last Night I Had the
Yeah,
Strangest
I mean,
Dream,
there was that side of it, and of course, that was Woody Guthrie. You know, if you went back farther in New York to that, you had Leadbelly, Sonny Terry, Woody Guthrie, Reverend Gary Davis. You had the real people were there. I never saw that. The people I knew in New York pretty much were influenced by those teachers that were available there, which would have been Dave Van Ronk, Reverend Gary Davis, Brownie McGee. Still to this day, some of them don't know a thing about ethnic music. They just know, they learned from those people, so they know their records. Fortunately, some of those people were fabulous musicians, but as far as there being a controlling group, I can't really see it. It was, maybe you could say the people that owned the clubs had a little influence over who played there, but anybody wanted to play for free. Like, you know, I used to see Simon and Garfunkel for free every week at the Hootenannies and stuff. Like, everybody was trying to play. But by 1965, you had the first rock and roll groups. The first people were trying to do something, which would have been two groups. The Lovin' Spoonful with John Sebastian. And John is a Italian village kid. He grew up there. He didn't think rock and roll was uncool. His father was a great harmonica player, so he played harmonica. He was quite musical. Sang rock and roll doo-wop with Italian kids on the corner. You know, he was actually coming from a certain culture. The other group were the Sellouts, ironically named when I joined them for being a folkie that they just decided, well, you'll be selling out. And I went, what do you mean? I knew the other music first anyway. I always knew the rock and roll Fats Domino. Then you had a real different thing. You had the Even Dozen Jug Band, John had been in that before, with a lot of people that are later famous. And what it was the first super group, really. It was all the best kids that came to the Folklore Center. And some of them weren't in it by the time they recorded, but like Danny Hamburg was a great musician, and still is. I still see Danny. He's a tremendous musician. And you had Maria D'Amato, who's now Maria Moldauer. You had Stephen Grossman, Steve Katz. You had David Grisman. It was sort of all the Fred Wise. You had all those young people that were the best, according to someone, and they made a group out of them, and Izzy was their manager. Well, soon enough, Izzy wasn't their manager, and that's when we first... Not only was Izzy not their manager, but they used to meet in my store for free while I did repairs at night and practice. And there were there was almost 10 of them plus friends. And pretty soon they fired Izzy, and hired this other character, I think his name's Paul Rothschild. And he was going to make them a big group. And then I was sitting there doing repairs, and I said, well, wait a minute, if he's their manager, why are they in my store? Like, what are they doing here? So I kicked them out. I said, I have no interest to even hear all this shit about 2%, 4%, we're going to get royalties. Suddenly it was that other thing which I wasn't interested in then. And I'll admit I'm not too interested in it now, really. I like to see people get a fair deal, but it was sort of the beginning of that thing. Izzy kept saying, why aren't I the manager anymore? Well, you're the assistant manager. You get nothing for doing all the work you did. Oh, you know. And you had people that could see that there was money to be made. Simply, there was money that was going to be made. And Dylan's record was selling. You know, the whole thing was starting. John Baez was getting famous. No sooner did that happen than Sebastian had the #1 song on the hit parade of pop music. And the Village became this other thing.
What about the political side of it? Was there more political?
Well, it looked like a lot was going on, but I wasn't too involved in it. And as I didn't join a political group, I just would sympathize with certain things, like avoiding the draft. I had great sympathy for it because I thought that, that all the wars are ridiculous. On a one-to-one level, I could sympathize with someone, or myself, who were put in a position.
So as far as being a conscientious objector or a draft dodger, I didn't have too much respect for the law as it was, so I thought, well, if they want to go to Canada, Izzy was involved in helping people find their new way, avoid this thing which we now know was a horrendous situation. As far as being directly political, I have my beliefs, but they're far from any of these things called political parties. I've never seen one that really suited me or people I hang out with exactly. So I never really was joining up. Are you a Leninist or Bolshevik or Trotskyite? I have my opinions of those people's writings and stuff, but it just didn't matter to me. In New York, it was sort of like, who do you like better, Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays? It was like, what degree of Trotskyite can you it was like they had it down, and these kids knew all about it. And at the same time, I didn't feel like that they were solving anything that I would want to join up with it.
On a less detailed level, less programmatic level, you had writers like Oakes, who's the preeminent, he's the one that everybody knows as a political writer, most topical, Paxton to a lesser degree.
Oh, that stuff was...
Did you follow that stuff or pay attention to
Well,
their
I went to a
writings over the
concert
years?
once at Carnegie Hall of young folk singers, because we'd go to everything, really, and if you had the money, hey, there's a concert up there at City College, and you'd go everywhere. When Phil Oakes performed in that, I was quite impressed with a few songs he wrote. Tom Paxton, I'd never been impressed really by a note yet. I don't know, I just go like, not that there's anything wrong with his music, but I go, how did he get national and international with that? As far as Phil Oakes writing political songs, I have a pretty cynical opinion of why he did it, but he did write some very good songs for a few short minutes.
What's your cynical opinion?
Well, I think he was just trying to get popular, really. I mean, it was me who saw him sitting behind a tree reading Billboard when that was totally taboo, and I went, hey, man, what you doing? He just was so shocked. I went, well, sorry.
Did these people all pick up the start out?
Yeah. Well, Phil Oakes I actually had kicked out of my store because I didn't really like the guy.
Hold on a second.
All right, back on. We were
Talking about Phillips.
We were talking about
Yeah.
Phil Oakes and his
Well,
did you know him well? So you were telling you...
well, he'd come in my store and say something that would offend me. Don't forget, it's real hard to insult a hippie. It's almost impossible. And he would say something like, how much are these picks? 3 for a quarter. Well, do you know how much they cost to make? They only cost a penny each. So you're ripping people off. And I'd say, it just balances how many picks you get stolen out of the box. I said, we've been doing it. People play it. Can I use a pick? They put it in their pocket. They're not really stealing it, but you don't really have it anymore. So I explained it to him. He said, it's still a rip-off, and you should feel guilty about it. I said, I'll tell you what. You can go on the other side of the door and don't ever come back in. I didn't have too much. There's a few people I just didn't want in my store. I didn't need him.
Who else?
I feel he was at least two-faced, to say the least. Who else?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just some people that would harass you and never add anything. As far as being political on songs, I think, when Dylan sang The Times Are Changing, it's a general song, but of course, if you get the meaning of it, it's political, and if you don't, it's just a song. So, to me, it was not a ballad of Hattie Carroll. They're much more political to me than the career of Phil Oakes, which Another person that would fall into that would be Buffy St. Marie. She wrote a great song, Universal Soldier. Great peace, protest, or political. And I don't know if she ever again wrote anything like it, or I don't know. You go so you can look back and say they were in. It was in to be a broadside singer or a protest singer. It was sort of a little few years where it was in to be that. And yet, does that have anything to do with the whole thing? I'm not sure.
Happy was in a political group, the New World Singers.
Yeah, that was a group, that was sort of like what I was saying before about you had these Weavers type of groups. Happy's group, like Happy himself, was like totally good-hearted, good-natured, and he's a positive guy, he's a big-hearted guy, and wasn't a kind of group that will be like, we're hipper than you, we're going to put you down while we sing satire. I don't think they were really into it. They wrote a few songs. I don't know if Happy wrote songs. Happy had been in a group before that with a woman that lives here in Berkeley now named Jolly Robinson. I see her sometimes here, and she was in that, and I think she and a guy named Gil Turner.
Yeah.
And then she left, and someone, I don't know who replaced her, maybe, I can't remember. I wasn't really too interested in that kind of music, and really those groups would come and go. It's like why they were doing it either to play somewhere or to make a record, or something was happening. I wasn't quite. I mean, I have to remember that I had already sort of retired as a musician by 64. I was still playing a lot, but I didn't sing at the time in public, so I just thought, well, I'll do instruments. That's what I'm doing now, so I got to still play, and then until I got into an electric band when I started playing a lot again.
Who did you like in the village, musically, not personally, musically? Who did you want to go see, if you could, on your geographic scene?
That's a good question. Well, pretty soon, well, at first I'd go see anybody because someone would say, go see these guys, they're great. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know who they were.
I remember going to the Gaslight Cafe, maybe around 1961. Maybe I was visiting New York trying to get some money from Izzy. And they had their hootenanny, and I was just so amazed by how good everybody was. Including, it was the night of Dylan signed his contract, actually. There was this big commotion in the corner. I was getting a record contract. I was, wow. And Stephen Grossman and Steve Katz had a little duet that they'd play Reverend Davis stuff. Reverend Davis was in it, Jim Queskin was in it. Queskin and Dylan were a duet at that corner.
Man, I remember it.
We're down.
It's done?
No, it's down. I thought it had stopped.
Anyway, that really impressed me. I think Sandy Bull was in it. I mean, it's great guitarist in New York named Bruce Langhorne. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'd heard the best guitarist in New York without knowing it, which would have been Perry Letterman. And the only two people he ever thought were any good was Bruce Langhorne and Reverend Davis. And here they were both in this hootenanny. And I really haven't, of course, I've never heard anybody play like either of them. We copied the Reverend Davis, but those are people that were original great people. As far as going to the clubs, it was pretty much where you could get in free. Mm-hmm. And who I like to see, who I like to see was Doc Watson, Bessie Jones and the Georgia Sea Island Singers, Skip James. I mean, those things were interesting to me, and fortunately, a lot of times it would be Skip James and Doc Watson on the same show. Of course, Mississippi John Hurt would come. Little by little, the people we'd heard on the Smith Anthology would show up live, and it would just be like a grand occasion, you know, to see someone like Mississippi John Hurt, who not only was a great songster and musician, he's the only one of the older Mississippi musicians that were black that spoke in an understandable dialect. So he appealed to people a little sooner than somebody like Charlie Patton, who, you know, he was dead, but or Booker White, Muddy Waters, you know, like unless you were into it socially. And he was a wonderful guy. Mance Lipscomb would come. You know, pretty soon a lot of ethnic people started showing up. Cousin Emmy, and they had the Friends of Old Time Music, bringing those people.
I was going to say, did you know about that?
Oh, sure.
Well,
that was just like people from the past were now going to play like in your neighborhood. It was like sort of unbelievable. Even if you didn't know who they were, or Hobart Smith came, and old blind balladeers from the Appalachians, like, you know, real straight singers, the straightest singing people you've ever heard. They just sang a hymn out of a hymn book, or a ballad out of an old. At the same time, I've always was curious about the music of my communist upbringing. I kept going, how come this makes us communists? Like this, I never could quite see it. And, you know, I grew up in Detroit where there was a lot of labor union movements, and of course, it was bad to be a commie. There was a lot of talk about, you know, there's commies and the labor unions, and I didn't know what it meant, but it was an active strain of thought. So when I got to see these people, and I just couldn't fathom it, you know, so I didn't pay any attention to not going. Someone like Guy Carawan would come to New York, and also to Ann Arbor, so I thought, yeah, you could talk to the people too. And somehow we thought they were kind of big stars, like the New Lost City Ramblers. They're always friendly to me. Even I talked to Mike Seeger, he's still a pretty good friend of mine, and none of them realized anything either. You know, they didn't know we didn't play. We did play. They just came and played at your school, and slept at someone's house, and did a little concert, and went to the next place. It was sort of infantile. The influence of that particular bunch, of New Lost City Ramblers, I mean, the influence of them was almost harder to see than anything else, because that was a reinterpretation of ethnic stuff by scholars, really, by like people that had somehow become scholars of that weird thing. Of course, Mike Seeger grew up in that.
Yeah.
His family were scholars. Tom Paley came from that bunch in Westport, Connecticut, with Shaky Richards and Eric Von Schmidt. It was like another group that wasn't in New York that somehow got a hold of Library of Congress stuff. It was just odd people that were attracted to it, to be different, or they were just, it suited them.
As guys like Hobart Smith and Doc Boggs or whatever started coming into Manhattan to perform, and into other places at festivals, in large part brought about by the guys in the Ramblers, for instance.
Yeah, exactly.
Did they, in a sense, put themselves out of work? I mean, the Ramblers hung on through the 60s.
No.
But,
the Ramblers was, and still are, a sentimental favorite. Like, they turned a lot of people onto that music. People that came a few years after me. They came to the school. Al Young said, well, we're going to have a great string band this week, and make sure you go. It's some outstanding people. You go, oh, boy, something to go to. So we'd go. And then one of the more attractive things about it, to me, was that you actually could know the people. Right? Pete Seeger, of course, was the biggest name in folk music, and here was his half-brother talking to you, being kind of friendly, and, not packing up and going to the hotel or anything, staying in someone's house. And it all seemed quite an improvement to me over the formality you would have expected. And I don't think they lost their position.
Were they stylistically, do you think, more palatable to a modern audience? A little easier to take, a little more soothing than Hobart Smith himself, or some of the.
Well,
the
just
people
that they were eclectic. They had gained their sources from. All the
variety of
records that would be.
all the traditions. Yeah.
And of course, they also had met people too. Well, Mike's still doing the same thing. I don't know about Tom Paley and John Cohen, but I suppose they're still involved in it. I mean, if you brought an ethnic musician out of the woods and they were somewhere nearby, they'd want to check it out. And of course, Tom Paley was an outstanding early fingerstyle guitar player. Like, we used to just go, hey, I got to learn that. And actually, they gave me the idea that you could learn the stuff on an ethnic song and reinterpret it and present it. Before that might have been off limits. That song's from 1922 and you can't, And then a lot of this stuff, I say they were a tremendous influence in the Midwest. At Madison, Chicago, Ann Arbor, Oberlin. One other guy was a big influence too, named Paul Prestipino. And he was like the first guy you ever would run into that could really play. He had a harp guitar and he played with Scruggs pegs on his banjo. We were going. He could play anything and sing, and it was. I think he taught at Oberlin. I'm not exactly sure. His father was a famous sculptor, and they were always artistic. They're from Princeton, New Jersey. And I don't know what's happened to Paul. His brother's named Gregory. Is a filmmaker. You ever heard of him, Gregory Prestipino?
Where is it?
I don't know. He makes sort of documentary films, and he's a very interesting guy. He used to hang around my shop the whole time. He's a younger brother. But Paul, I went to the Oberlin Festival, maybe 1958 or 59. We drove down there from Ann Arbor, and I just was knocked out by this guy. And of course, they were all friends from the East Coast scene. You knew John Cohen and Tom Paley. And as far as the Ramblers, I think it's monumental what they did, in a way. And their songbook, if you see their little songbook of a few hundred songs, you could pretty much go out and be a white musician with just their songbook. They got all the songs are sort of exquisitely chosen, and the version. I've always had the greatest respect for that because I've never spent my life in white ethnic music, generally speaking. And yet, when I think of the songs I do know that I think are great, maybe half of them come from hearing them from those guys. And they led us into this, as the Smith Anthology and the Leadbelly records led us into it. They almost led us into it more because they were more like us. They were more like guys that had learned it. And I thought they were terrific, really. I mean, I still think they're pretty terrific, although I've had 30 years to develop these super string bands these days, and it's just gone to a place nobody would have imagined. I wouldn't have imagined it. We didn't even think anybody could play a fiddle. At first, nobody could play one. Now you hear 40 people at a time playing terrific at a festival, so we never imagined that, and yet it's all been done without, my feeling is it's all been done without there being a central culture to it. It's sort of an odd occasion to me.
You mean without there being one narrow tradition?
No, I mean a culture would be something like a yogurt culture. You take a little bit of it and it starts again. Got it. As far as that, it's going the other way. Like I heard the new Lost City Ramblers do a Doc Boggs song, and then I heard on the Smith Anthology Doc Boggs do it. And I go, boy, he's got a weird voice. What a weird notes he sings. And pretty soon you understand their musical tradition. And maybe not the style of life. You have to go to the mountains and really see somebody like... I've lived now in other countries with people who live in the agrarian style, so it's not so shocking to me anymore. But like where Doc Watson grew up, a town of like a few people. Well, how's somebody from Detroit or New York supposed to understand that? Unless you had relatives in it, or it's very, very difficult transition to make. Unless you go live with them and you cut the firewood and you clean the stove and do it the way they do it. I have great respect for the way these people do it, but that's what you call culture. They do it by things they learn, things that come to them. I don't really feel like the city people in the modern time have that. Generally, I just don't feel we have it. It's a media culture. It's taken from clues.
Did you ever get any insights into what some of these folks, John Hurt, Doc Watson, whatever, any insight into what their perceptions were when they were suddenly stars in front of these bohemians in the cellar on the Google Street, taken out of their environment, put on this stage below Manhattan, sing songs to these
I've had a lot of thoughts about it. You basically have two types. you have a type that never recorded and never did that. Nance Lipscomb. You had, oh boy, his name is slipping my mind. Well, he was the guy that was such friends with John Cohen that played the banjo, from Hazard, Kentucky.
Oh.
Roscoe.
Okay, Roscoe.
Roscoe Holcomb.
Yeah.
Well, they basically were front porch musicians or played at a little local something. Other people, like John Hurt, had been recording stars in their earlier days, and Doc Boggs. So they had some sense of going to somewhere, as far as like us, delineating the differences in those days, we just couldn't. As far as, it was just a privilege to see these people. I mean, to me, the thing that, I played in this band, the Sellouts, and of course I'd make all those guys in that band who were, Chuck Berry and Lonnie Mack, they were playing rock and roll. Of course, they were living in the Village. So I'd say, hey, there's some great guys coming. And I think the most unique or specific occasion was when Doc Watson and Skip James were playing in the same night at the Gaslight. And these guys, some were from Memphis and, had southern roots, more rural roots, came with me. They thought Doc Watson was just unbelievable, which he is. Skip James, they didn't relate to him at all. They didn't think he was good, bad. They said, I don't know, it's kind of weird music. What are that guys doing? 1 year later, which is a year they spent in Greenwich Village, these sellouts, we went, it was the same show the next spring. It was Doc Watson. It was sort of pre-Newport. They'd show up. Doc Watson and Skip James. We went, and they thought Doc was something that they really thought was great but normal, and that Skip James was the greatest thing they've ever heard in their life. Because they had been exposed to the other thing. And, they thought that the black tradition was represented by Chuck Berry or Bo Diddley or something like that. And, of course, we've always had this problem in that we want to put the black people into a black culture that's specifically named instead of saying it's diverse. And then you have to experience it to understand it or feel it. We want to go, they cook this food, they play this music, they play blues. They play blues, that's it, they play blues. I find it very offensive because historically lots of things have been taken from the black people and not only going to give them back a little at a time, we'll give you blues. There's a diverse culture there with every possible kind of music, every kind of food, every kind of thing. And some black people in this country aren't related at all to some other black people in any sense. So, that standard has always been tough, and yet the Village was a great melting pot for that. Here were these southern guys going, they couldn't listen to Skip James. They didn't know how to just